For the past 75 years, NATO has been protecting Europe, and America has been backing NATO. But now with Donald Trump coming in, everything is about to change. Trump has openly said that America should leave NATO because it's no longer needed. After his heated debate with Ukrainian President Zelensky, all the European leaders have been losing sleep. Germany's new chancellor has also said that we need independence from America, and NATO will end very soon. The million-dollar question is, if the US leaves NATO, can Europe defend itself against Russia? At a press conference, when Trump asked the UK Prime Minister if the UK could fight Russia without America, all they could do was laugh. Could you take on Russia by yourself? Well, can the UK, Germany, and France even build a strong enough army together so they don't need America? The most important question is, what impact would leaving NATO have on the U.S.? For years, the U.S. has been working with NATO on operations in other countries. Whether it's Afghanistan, Iraq, or even Libya, America has always put NATO at the forefront in every war. So if America separates from NATO, is it powerful enough to fight anyone on its own? Another important question is, if the U.S. leaves NATO, won't China take advantage of that? Similarly, America's entire strategy to control the Arctic depends on NATO. So what happens after that breaks apart? In today's video, we're going to talk about the downfall of the world's biggest military alliance, a downfall that could impact the entire world. It's going to change the whole order, and maybe the world will reach a stage again like it did after World War I. Once again, I request you all to subscribe to 5M History so you get notifications for new videos, and it motivates us to keep making quality content. First, let's understand how and why NATO was formed and how it became so dependent on the US. Actually, after World War II, Europe was pretty weak, and the Soviet Union was rapidly moving towards Europe. To stop the Soviet Union, on April 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO for short, was formed with just one goal. If any member country was attacked, all the others would come together to defend it. The US took the lead in this organization, providing military leadership, nuclear protection, and financial support. During the Cold War, NATO became even more important, and America started setting up permanent military bases in West Germany, Italy, and the UK to keep the Soviet Union in check. Over time, many more European countries cut down on their military spending and started relying on American protection. When the Soviet Union broke up in 1991, many thought NATO might no longer be necessary, but instead of breaking up, NATO actually expanded. A lot of Eastern European countries that were once under Soviet control wanted to join NATO because they were afraid Russia might try to take over again. Then in 1999, when Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic joined NATO, the alliance got closer to Russia. By 2004, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania had joined, and a bunch of other countries also joined NATO, which expanded right up to Russia's borders. For Russia, this was a direct threat, and they accused the West of breaking their promise not to expand NATO after the Cold War. Despite these accusations, in 2008, NATO promised that Ukraine and Georgia could also join in the future. Seeing NATO getting so close, Russia got pissed off and attacked Georgia that same year. This was a clear sign that Russia wouldn't tolerate any more NATO expansion. Then in 2014, Russia, they also took control over Crimea, and in response, NATO deployed more troops and missile systems in Eastern Europe, with the US backing it all since they were funding the military and supplying the most weapons. Then during Barack Obama's time, the US tried to expand NATO without provoking Russia. Obama increased NATO's forces in Eastern Europe, but assured Russia that Ukraine wouldn't be brought into NATO. However, after Biden became president in 2021, the US approach changed once again. The US openly started supporting Ukraine and began sending billions of dollars in military aid. Around the same time, Finland and Sweden applied for NATO membership in 2022. Seeing NATO expand like this really pissed off Russia, and in February 2022, they launched a full-scale attack on Ukraine. This war completely changed NATO's role. NATO was no longer just a defensive alliance. They were directly supplying weapons and money to Ukraine, making it the biggest conflict in NATO's history. Now, NATO was, despite being powerful and large, American leadership heavily relies on military funding and strength. In 2023, the US accounted for 70% of NATO's total defense budget, making it the biggest financial backer of the alliance. Many European countries like Germany and France had already cut their military budgets after the Cold War, assuming the US would take care of their protection. Now, America not only provides funding, but also maintains a decent military presence in Europe, according to 2023 stats. According to reports, around 100,000 US troops are stationed in NATO countries, and the US has permanent bases in Germany, Italy, Poland, and the UK. the U.S. supplies NATO countries with state-of-the-art weapons, including advanced missile defense systems like the Patriot and Aegis Ashore, which help protect European countries from potential missile attack. The U.S. also provides military jets like the F-35, F-16, and F-15 to NATO countries. When it comes to nuclear support, some experts say the U.S. has about 100 nuclear bombs are in NATO countries like Germany, Belgium, Italy, and the Netherlands. Similarly, the U.S. helps the NATO Army track enemy movements and intercept their communications using spy satellites and drones. But now, with Donald Trump becoming president, big changes are coming because Trump has criticized NATO many times. He has accused European countries of not contributing their fair share. Recently, Trump said that if NATO countries don't increase their military, if they don't increase their spending, the U.S. won't defend them anymore, and they might even leave NATO. And if the U.S. leaves NATO, then 70% of NATO's defense budget will disappear. Along with that, NATO will also lose American nuclear bombs, highly trained soldiers, and weapons that have been protecting it for years. So if we take out the U.S. defense budget and just look at Europe's defense spending, in 2024, all of Europe's defense spending was a total of $457 billion. Meanwhile, if we calculate Russia's defense spending, after factoring in purchasing power parity, Russia's defense budget comes to $461.6 billion. This is the first time Russia is spending more on its military than Europe. The most important thing is that the Asian army follows a single command and language, while European armies are divided among many commanders and languages. Similarly, to make up for the shortage of 100,000 U.S. troops, Europe will have to significantly boost its military strength, adding at least around 50 brigades. Thousands of tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery will be included. On paper, Europe has around 1.45 million soldiers, which is a huge number, but the reality is very different. These soldiers are spread across 28 countries, each following its own separate leadership and command structure. While the American army operates under a single command, European armies operate under their own country's military generals. So there's no unified strategy or plan for this army. Every country has its own weapons and chain of command. That's why America's 100,000 soldiers Europe is more powerful than 1.4 million soldiers, because they follow a single command and strategy. Another example of this logistics gap is that if Russia attacks the Baltic, NATO would need 1,400 tanks, 2,000 vehicles, and 700 artillery units to stop Russia. This number is so huge that even if France, Germany, Italy, and the UK combine, they can't form such a large force. Similarly, if the US shuts down its 6 nuclear bases in Europe, Europe would become vulnerable. That's why French President Macron, Germany's new Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, is thinking about boosting nuclear capabilities. And there's even a possibility that France's nuclear bombs could be stored in Germany to create a European nuclear shield that wouldn't rely on the US. But building nuclear facilities takes a lot of time. And in the short term, Europe can't replace the security it gets from America. If Europe wants to replace the US, it'll need to create a special European army, which would take years of investment and political agreement. Structural reforms aside, let's talk about what impact leaving NATO would have on the US. For the past 76 years, the US has used NATO as a tool to project its military power worldwide. Whether it was the Afghanistan War, the Iraq War, or the Libya War, NATO forces have always had America's back. NATO has shared the burden of these wars through its troop, air support, and logistics. If the U.S. leaves NATO, it won't get Europe's support in future wars, and that would be a big deal. There was a lot of support, like in the Afghan War, when the UK, Germany, and France supplied thousands of troops and weapons. If America had fought that war alone, it would have needed way more soldiers and money. Another huge advantage is the network of military bases and supply routes spread across Europe and the Middle East. Right now, the U.S. relies on NATO bases in Germany, Italy, Turkey, and the UK to deploy troops, launch missions, and get weapons to the war zone. For example, the Ramstein Air Base in Germany is used by the U.S. military. Having operations in the Middle East and Africa is really important. And similarly, the Incirlik Air Base in Turkey has been crucial for airstrikes in Syria and Iraq. If the U.S. leaves NATO, it will lose access to these bases, making future military operations much harder, more expensive, and time-consuming. Right now, through NATO, the U.S. can quickly deploy its forces anywhere. Without that, it would have to rely solely on its own bases or negotiate separate agreements with each country, which would take a lot more time. There has to be not just taking action, but also political bargaining involved. You see, wars aren't won by military strength alone. Winning a big war requires good strategy, support from other countries, and coordinated efforts. So without NATO, America might still be powerful, but it would have to bear the entire burden of global conflicts on its own. That's where America's Arctic strategy comes into play. If NATO weakens or falls apart during Trump's time, the Arctic will become the most critical battlefield for the U.S. The Arctic is rapidly becoming a very important area. The Arctic is becoming a hotspot where Russia and China are aggressively expanding their presence. It's not just about the ice there. The Arctic has oil, gas, and a bunch of rare earth minerals. As the ice melts, new trade routes are opening up. Whoever controls the Arctic will control future trade, military strategy, and resources. Right now, thanks to NATO, the U.S. has a strong alliance in the Arctic, especially with Canada, Norway, Greenland, and Iceland. But if NATO falls apart, the U.S. will have to handle the entire Arctic on its own. The strategy needs to be rethought because otherwise, it won't get support from these countries. Right now, Russia has the strongest military presence in the Arctic. They've set up over 50 military bases there and built the world's largest icebreaker fleet, which includes more than 40 icebreaking ships. Besides that, nuclear submarines and bombing jets are constantly operating in the area. Russia's Northern Fleet, specifically designed for the Arctic, gives them a huge advantage over others. The U.S. has very limited resources in the Arctic, only 2 icebreaker ships and a few military bases, mostly in Alaska. To boost its presence there, America will need to invest heavily in new icebreakers. Plus, the U.S. Navy will have to step up submarine patrols to keep Russia and China from making advances. If NATO isn't around, the U.S. will have to strike direct security deals with Arctic NATO countries like Canada, Norway, and Denmark. One solution could be there should be an Arctic Defense Pact exclusively among the Arctic countries. Besides military strength, the U.S. will also need to develop its resource extraction infrastructure in the Arctic. Russia is rapidly taking control of the Arctic's oil and gas reserves, so the U.S. must aggressively expand its drilling and mining operations to maintain its dominance in the region. To control the Arctic, the U.S. will have to build more ports, military bases, and research facilities there. Additionally, the U.S. will also have to deal with China's growing influence. Even though China isn't an Arctic country, it has declared itself a near-Arctic country and is heavily investing in trade routes, infrastructure, and resource extraction projects there. If NATO falls apart, America's security will be compromised, and the result will be a new Arctic Cold War where the U.S., Russia, and China race to control the Arctic waters, resources, and military zones. If the U.S. doesn't act quickly, Russia and China could solidify their dominance here and end up controlling all the trade in the region. So in the coming years, the Arctic is going to play a really important role in global power dynamics. If NATO falls apart, the U.S. will have to face the growing military presence of Russia and China in the Arctic. But the big question is America ready for this challenge? Similarly, if NATO collapses, it would be another big loss for the U.S. when it comes to Europe's security. We'll have to look for another superpower, and this is where China comes into the picture. If the U.S. leaves NATO, China could offer security to European countries and build strong economic and military ties with them. Historically, Europe has always sided with the West, but over the past few years, China has invested billions of dollars in Europe, especially in industry, infrastructure, and technology. Similarly, through the Belt and Road Initiative, China has made significant investments in European countries, including highways and railways. China is funding ports and energy projects, mostly in countries like Italy, Greece, and Hungary. In fact, China has even bought a majority stake in the Piraeus port in Greece, which is one of Europe's busiest ports. Besides that, China's growing investments in Germany's car industry and tech startups are worrying a lot of analysts because they think Europe is becoming increasingly dependent on Beijing's money. So if NATO weakens, China could use its economic power to influence Europe. Countries can be pressured politically and forced to cooperate more. Similarly, China already has a strong alliance with Russia, and if the U.S. pulls back from NATO, Moscow and Beijing will grow even closer. This could lead to a new world order where China and Russia control Europe and extend their dominance into the Middle East, Africa, and the Arctic. So if the U.S. steps away from NATO, it won't just leave Europe vulnerable, it will also give China a big opportunity. If he takes global security into his own hands, one thing is clear. Leaving NATO isn't that easy for the U.S. because it could have some serious consequences. No matter how much Trump says NATO is a burden on America, the truth is that without NATO, America's military power and global influence would be incomplete. Similarly, Europe can't replace the U.S. in the short term. Their army is divided, their nuclear capability is limited, and they don't have the military strength that America does. So So if NATO ends, it would only the downfall of the world's most powerful military alliance isn't just going to happen. It's actually the start of a new world order. And this new world order has already begun since Trump came into the picture. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.